Hey friends, welcome to the channel. Bob here. I hope you're well. Today I'm going to do a video talking a little bit about Pantheon. I streamed it the other day and a couple of people asked me about it, so I thought I would just do a little video. I think for the TLDR version is that the game is a painfully generic MMO, indie MMO. It's pretty much what we've been seeing from all the games that we've played over the last few years. Which is a shame. I think like many of you, when we went back and experienced EverQuest on P99, and some developers came along and told us that they're going to start working on the spiritual successor to these games. I think we all had high hopes, but unfortunately, it turns out that they're all very similar. No one is really trying to separate themselves, and I would say. It's probably not unfair to say that it feels like they're copying each other as well. I mean, as a fan of someone who became a fan of the running around, gathering, kind of doing a bit of crafting gameplay loop. These games are trying to recreate that, but it's painful how similar they are, and it's also painful how the same mistakes they're making. Just how unfun it is. These like roadblocks that. I don't really see what they're adding to the game, what they're bringing. Certainly if I was on the design team sitting around a table or a Teams meeting, I'd really be asking like, why are we doing this? Like, what's going on? And there are a number of examples of these design choices. First of all, there aren't nearly enough nodes out there for you to gather from, and it becomes a running simulator. It's weird. Like my wife used to say to me. All you seem to do is run around, and that was kind of the case. But in a game like EverQuest, you were kind of getting from one camp to the other, essentially, or one zone to the other. That was where the running came into it. But with this game, you're literally running around in loops over and over again in the same area, hoping you get a node before someone else does. It's not fun design. It's not a PvP game. I mean, if it was. I can understand this competing for nodes. It's not a market thing, no matter how much people might try to convince you. Economies in MMOs don't really work because it's not real life, and for the main people don't care. And if you design your gathering crafting system correctly, say for example, like what can we use, like New World does. Then you're not worried about your economy being flooded with resources because you've designed it so that it works around that. I did an experiment. I went to a few different areas to gather from, and I increased my kind of gameplay loop, as it were, to find resources and whatnot. And on a quiet time on the server, with only a couple of other people running around gathering, it was very, very difficult to find stuff, to a point where it took me ages just to complete the newbie quests. And that's also an issue because the newbie quests are designed around the gathering and crafting gameplay loop. So when the game comes out in early access, I can't recommend it because at the moment, unless you look at the patch notes and it changes, you will spend most of your time in the game running around desperately looking for a node. I mean, you don't have to do that, I guess. I mean, you can go and just kill mobs, I suppose, and level up. But the problem is that the whole newbie quest and the introduction to the game revolves around gathering and crafting. The game is almost, and that leads on to other quests for different things as well. So the game is almost requiring you to do it. It's telling you that this is what our gameplay loop is. If you're lucky enough to find a node. If you're desperately running towards one, like a massive man-child, and someone else is doing it, and you happen to click on it first, it then takes ages to gather from. Again, which is like a roadblock, a time sink. I don't understand. Like why? It doesn't really make any sense. I mean, even when you take into consideration that maybe you'll get like if your skill goes up, for example, so you get quicker at doing it, maybe you'll get an item or a gathering tool that lets you do it quicker. That's fair enough, but it doesn't need to start off so slowly. You know, instead of it being like 12 seconds or whatever it is ridiculous, it could be 6 seconds, and maybe over time it goes down to 4 seconds or whatever. That's the thing as well, is that, you know, as we've seen with other indie MMOs, you only get one chance, and if you blow it, then people leave your game and they don't come back. You just look at some of the other MMOs that this has happened to, and the tiny populations they've got, where people are struggling to find groups and do anything essentially. It is a shame, but you know, it's weird how they're all copying each other, and they really are copying each other. I mean, if you squinted, this gameplay loop that this game has, I mean, maybe, like, you know, if you're a Rust player or something, you might liken it to Rust, but I mean, really, it is just like Embers Adrift or any of the other games. Monsters and Memories is the same. Eternal Tombs, whatever it may be, you know, it's this generic running around hoping that you find a node, and it just becomes boring very quickly. And then when you reach a node, you click on it, and you actually literally just take your hands off the keyboard, and you're like, oh, you're done. Okay, right, fine. Okay, so we can carry on playing the game now. That's a key thing that I found with all of these indie MMOs, is that you spend less time playing the game. You spend more time not playing the game. You know, overcoming all of these barriers that are put in the way, then you do spend running around playing the game. Now, one of the only things that this game is like EverQuest for is the inventory system, where you get bags and stuff, and you can make your own bags and whatnot. But the mistake that this game makes, which is again the mistake that Embers Adrift makes, is that EverQuest didn't have a gathering system. So the bag system, if it's the same as EverQuest, in the sense that you might be lucky and get a drop, or you've got to wait to make them yourself, doesn't work, because your bags fill up much quicker than they would if you were playing EverQuest. So they haven't thought about these things. They haven't thought about the fact that, okay, so we've got a gathering system, so we kind of need to make sure that players don't have to keep running back to do whatever it is. That when they go out to play the game, they spend time out there enjoying and playing the game. No, not in these games. In the early stage, you're constantly running back to sell stuff or whatever it may be, and it's just frustrating. You know, again, it's another mistake that other indie MMOs have made, and yeah, it just all leads to this feeling of like I'm not playing like I'm spending more time running around fixing problems and playing the game. Embers Adrift had exactly the same issue, and this one has just fallen into that trap. You know, it's designing systems, but it's not thinking about how it's going to affect your day-to-day game. Now, I don't know about you. I don't mind doing some housekeeping. Some jobs are necessary to get you to the next point. But when they take up the majority of your time, when you'd rather be running around killing things or whatever it may be, then I think that's a problem. And I think this is exactly the same. I spend too much time in this game solving problems like full inventories because there's a load of gathering to do, than I do actually running around playing the game. Unless I ignore the gathering, but then that means you're ignoring the newbie quests. So it's then like, well, what do I do? You know, it's. But aside from all that, like even if the newbie quests didn't require you to go and gather some stuff, the whole gathering system is just still far too slow. You know, it feels like it's purposely done to keep you playing the game, but not in a fun way. And I just think it's a real shame. I just think that we've got to this point with the games, with these indie MMOs in particular. You know, it feels like a horrible cross between a really extreme version of classic EverQuest and a modern MMO, and it just doesn't work. It feels like icky. You know, I can't imagine even someone who liked World of War, like WoW Classic, really enjoying this. You know, it's just, yeah, it's a strange mixture of MMOs. It's almost like some people got together who like different MMOs from different eras, and they've incorporated all of the ideas, and they just don't work. But the key one here is that obviously, like a gathering crafting gameplay loop is not really a classic experience. Arguably, Ultra Online maybe a bit, but not particularly. Certainly, EverQuest Asheron's Call, for example, Dark Age of Camelot. Was never really based around that, so it kind of doesn't feel right anyway. But the fact that you spend most of your time doing that, the thing is, it wouldn't be so bad if you spent most of your time gathering, but you don't. You spend most of your time running around looking for something to gather, and that really is an issue. And then obviously there are other systems that are incorporated that feel like they're trying to be a classic MMO, like the inventory system, for example. But because there's loads of gatherables, that doesn't work because you don't have enough bag space early on. So it just becomes a frustrating, as my wife used to say, a frustrating running simulator trying to solve problems that just mean that you're not playing the game as much as you want to. But that's it. That's where we are. You know, that it's if I squinted and I was running around playing the game, doing the gameplay loop, it would be exactly the same. It would feel like I could be playing any of the other classic MMOs that I've played over the years. It really feels that generic, and I think it's a shame. You know, I think it's a shame that creatively, no one seems to be able to do anything different. And not only that, but they're making the same mistakes. You know, so the gameplay loop is not only very generic; it's what everyone else is doing. But it's not fun. It's not fun to engage with. I'm sure there will be a minority of players who will like it, but then many of them will like it because they like the developer or whatever. You know, some weird connection they've got. But for the most part, what that means the game ends up like Embers Adrift or Project Gorgon or whatever, where you've got a tiny player base, you know, and there's no one to group with or whatever. Moving on to, I mean, I haven't really got anything to say about the combat particularly. It's not like EverQuest. Don't let anyone fool you into thinking that it is. It's very much like, I would say, probably WoW Classic, where you build up meters. And when the meters build up, you use an ability, and other abilities you use, you've got cooldowns, that kind of thing. It can be quite strategical. Like when I got to the higher levels, whatever it was a few months ago, yeah. But you're not going to get that emergent dungeon experience that EverQuest Classic gave you, for example. And part of the reason for that is because of, again, how these games are developed now. You know, they seem to be developed to EverQuest was developed quite freeform and open, you know, so you can maybe say, oh, they didn't know what they were doing, etc, etc, etc. But by the time Velius came out, I'm pretty sure that they knew what they were doing. So, for example, enchanters in Cunark were running around soloing dungeons and stuff and names and whatnot, and not all of them, but for the most part they could still do that in Velius. And the key thing is that they didn't nerf them in Velius, so they couldn't do it in Cunark or Classic, because it's how it was. You know, if a good player could level up an enchanter to 60 and they can go around soloing names in dungeons and stuff, well, why not? You know, why would you want to limit that? But this is the sort of fun emergent stuff that I feel that all of these developers are scared of, and they don't want people to do it for whatever reason, even though it was a big thing in classic MMOs. There are just all of these limitations and barriers in place that make them feel just more like a scripted modern MMO than they do, you know, like the classic sandbox experience. Instead of saying, here's the game, this is how we've designed it, go and knock yourself out. It's right, we need to design it so players can't do this and they can't do that, and etc, etc, etc. Perfect example of this is the gathering and crafting system. So your max profession skills only go up when you level your character. So I don't know about you, but I do know a blacksmith in real life, and I've never known him to have to go out and kill some frogs or toads and then skin them to get better at blacksmithing. Like, I'm sure that's never happened. And you might say it's a game or whatever, but it doesn't make any sense, and there isn't really any need for it. Like, why would you need to limit it this way? And again, this is copying Embers Adrift. Embers Adrift does this exact same thing, where your character level is tied to your crafting level, and it's just another barrier, limitation, time sink that classic MMOs didn't have, that they're all incorporating. There's no need for this. When I mentioned this on the stream, someone said that they're doing it so that someone can't level up crafting and make loads of great stuff and then go out and kill stuff at level 1. Well, first of all, who cares? They've had to sit in town for however long it was to craft the stuff, so why shouldn't they be able to do that? And also, are we now saying that classic, like indie classic MMOs, like they don't like twinking anymore? you know, again, I'll refer back to classic EverQuest. You know, when Velius came out, or during Cunarch, they didn't stop level 1 characters wearing a fungi tunic, because the player has gone and earned that fungi tunic, so then they can do whatever they want with it. You know, why would you worry about that? The EverQuest developers didn't worry about, you know, a player like blasting through some content if they and being OP, because first of all, being OP is part of it. You know, like the power fantasy, you want to feel strong. You don't always want to feel like it's a struggle. And also, those players would have got to a point where they earned it anyway. So they give a leg up to their twink. Who cares? But again, this seems to be another mentality with indie MMOs where they just want to stop people doing these things that we were used to doing in classic MMOs, and for no real gain. In fact, what it's doing is it makes the game a lot less fun. If there was an argument that said it makes it more fun, then I can accept it. But I have, you know, kicked this around in my head quite a lot, and I really just can't see any advantage to it. In fact, what it does, I think like in Embers Adrift, people will spend less time playing your game because they don't want to go through the same process over and over again as a level 1 character. You know, I'm 100% sure that a number of people on P99 carried on playing and playing twinks because they could twink them. And they felt that they'd earned the right for their characters to just do, you know, to have an easier introduction to the game than any twinks or any new characters they created. And I'm sure if it was like this, they probably wouldn't have created as many characters, and so they'd played the game less, and so it's detrimental to your bottom line at the end of the day because the players are playing the game less essentially. But yeah, it doesn't seem to, as I said, like, you know, I think that, like, it would be great if the developers came out and said, look, we're trying to create a new genre of MMO, and they stopped going on about classic, because these games are just not classic in any way. They're far more limited, and there are far more time sinks and artificial barriers in the way to you. Obviously, a barrier, for example, that you would feel natural because it goes up by playing the game is your character level. So in EverQuest, your barrier to being able to do content is your level and your skill level to a certain extent. And obviously that makes sense because all you do in EverQuest is kill mobs and you go up in level. So it's a natural process. Running around trying to find a node is not natural because you've purposely limited them, which means that people have got to spend more time running around. You know, limiting your crafting and gathering to what your character level is not natural. It's purposely done to limit what your character can do. And so that's why I just don't think that these games are classic MMOs, and I wish that we would stop. I wish that they would stop kind of comparing them. Maybe they have now, I don't know. I don't take any notice, to be honest with you. I'm just fed up with it, really. But that's kind of where we are. Yeah. And the combat feels the same. As I said, if you engage a mob in this and you squinted, you could be playing Embers Adrift or any other game. And not because they're trying to emulate EverQuest, but because they literally just feel the same. I mean, I actually turned this game off the other day for what you might think is a weird reason. It wasn't to me in my head, but maybe you think it is. I went to a camp and I pulled a blue mob, and bearing in mind the message from the blue mob was still the usual blue message. You know, this mob looks tough, but you should win, essentially. And after 2 rounds, I was basically dead, and I hadn't really done any damage to the mob. And I thought, well, that's weird. Maybe it's a bugged mob. I went and tried it again, and no, same thing happened. No real RNG involved. It was just, you just can't kill this mob because it's designed that way. And I thought, that's weird. Like, what's going on? And then I noticed on the mob's nameplate a chevron. A chevron. And these chevrons they weren't on this camp at the time, because I played the game not that long ago, a few months, and they weren't there. So this game has now copied the chevrons from Embers Adrift as well as the fact that it's all just generic Embers Adrift. They've also now copied that. And some might, maybe someone will say, well, I don't know, Vanguard has chevrons or whatever. But really, it's copying Embers Adrift. It's got to a point where they're even copying each other's mechanics. And the thing with the chevron is it was crap in Embers Adrift and it's crap in this game, because what it tells me is that the developer's not talented enough to create an engaging, challenging encounter without just artificially increasing the hit points and the damage of the mobs. EverQuest didn't have this. Like, EverQuest was balanced so that if you pulled a blue mob, particularly depending on what class you were, you know, something might go wrong and you're not going to win. But it wasn't any tougher than another blue mob. It hadn't been designated as a tough mob. Yeah, you got names and stuff, but for the most part, like, many of the names didn't really have any more hit points or stuff or whatever than normal mobs. Particularly in like vanilla anyway, and some of Kunark. So yeah, it just feels like a lack of creativity. Like we can't create counters to be naturally challenging, so we have to designate mobs as being more challenging by essentially artificially inflating their abilities and their hit points and stuff. It's just a shame. It's a shame that we can't create engaging encounters without artificially inflating the mobs. But the biggest shame is the fact that you've copied someone else. You know, that you've literally copied from another game that is currently still in development hell. You know, it's weird. And I made a joke about, as I said, all these developers kind of talking to each other and stuff, but really it's not a joke. You know, it really seems to be happening. Like when you're incorporating the same systems in your game, the same loops with the same limitations, it's weird. I don't get it. I mean, it wouldn't be so bad if the camp had, like, I don't know, a couple of name mobs that were tougher or whatever. That's fine. But the fact that they're designated, not only is it limiting, so it's telling you what you can do and you can't do, which classic MMOs didn't do, but you're also just copying what another game is doing, because you can't come up with engaging systems yourself. It's like, yeah, it's weird. But anyway, that's where we are. It really is. This really is the next generic indie MMO, personified. And it's disappointing, because I was hoping for so much from the genre when it first came along. But there you go. That's where we are. If you want to play it after that and give it a go, you know, I'm not going to play early access. You know, I don't want to. I've got the time, but I don't want to waste my time running around arguing metaphorically over a limited amount of nodes, because that's how they've decided to design their system. I've just got no interest in it. You know, it's not like I want to run around and I want to play the game. I want to interact with the game more than I am running around. Yeah, but there you go. That's it. I'll stop now. Who's the game for? I've got no idea. This seems like a game that has nicked a load of ideas from different eras of MMOs, put them all together, and for the most part the systems don't work. It's also nicked stuff from survival games as well, and for the most part they're just not cohesive. They don't work together. Many of them don't make sense. Many of them just seem purposely designed to waste your time. But I've said this all before. You know, nothing changes. People stop playing them. There you go. Thanks for watching, and I'll speak to you again soon.